Well, I really appreciate everybody. I really appreciate everybody grabbing your lunch and taking your seats so quickly. Again, we do our best to try to pack so much important information into one day. And next, for our lunchtime panel, I have the great honor of introducing Ann Edmonds and Rebecca Kowalski. And I want to just share with you quickly a little bit about Ann Edmonds, because as I have talked about Paul Jones and Greg Hummel, Ann too has been at the table from the beginning. And the support that the Alliance received and continues to receive every day from Manpower has really been transformative in terms of our ability to work within the workforce space. Ann leads the workforce team. And since the creation of the team, Ann has brought together the leaders in workforce in the 3 states, as well as subject matter experts from literally all over the world. And being nothing but a great team player, Ann supports our transportation team by really connecting the dots with a very exciting workforce program that is designed for the transportation sector. There's more about that on the Alliance website. There's meetings that we host on a quarterly basis and webinars that are conducted by request. So if you are in the transportation space and you'd like to learn more about the work we're doing, please make sure to email me or come up to me today. But for right now, we want to get this important panel started. So Ann and Rebecca, if I could ask you to come up and share with the audience a little bit about your backgrounds, meetings, and then we talk about the importance of tomorrow's talent and seizing opportunity in the digital age. That are a warm welcome, please, for Rebecca and Ann.
Well, thank you so much, Kelly, and your kind words are very much appreciated. It has been my honor, actually, to have been with the Alliance for the past 5 years,
as well as
and chairing these large committees. But we have a really tight program today, so I'd like to get started. Tell you a little bit about Manpower. Manpower is a $22 billion company. It's a global company in 58 states. We understand employment. We employ over 4 million people every year, year in and year out. One of the largest employers in the world. Some of the things that we have been observing is how technology is changing the workplace, how productivity is changing in the workplace, as well as the demographic shifts that we're seeing across the world. We're also noticing that our customers are becoming far more sophisticated in this space. One of the things that I have observed is I have been in the employment business for 34 years, and I have never experienced such a tight labor market. At 3.7% unemployment, everyone who's employed or eligible to be employed is employed. It's very, very difficult. Just recently, I was promoted to the director of the U.S. Western Division. So I see operations the size of Chicago, Seattle, San Bernardino, Phoenix, but I also see the Peru, Illinois, the Sauk Valley, Illinois, some of the small markets. And this is not just a U.S. issue. Obviously, it's a global issue. And I'm so fortunate to have as my business partner, Rebecca Kowalski, who develops and designs strategic solutions for our client base across the world. So Rebecca, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much for that, Ann. So just a quick roadmap for what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about what we call at ManpowerGroup the double squeeze. So what's happening in terms of a pervasive shortage of rightly skilled talent on the one hand, and on the other hand, a rapid evolution in the kinds of roles and skills that are required. Then we're going to dive into how employers are looking at that, and what those roles and skills are. For those of you who were with me a couple of years ago right here in this room, we talked a little bit about what was happening in the world of digital manufacturing. We touched on the evolution to workforce. If you saw Becky Frankowitz last year, she talked a little bit more about that. We're going to go a little bit deeper today, and Anna's going to be doing some storytelling. So not just the scary stuff, but also some of the amazing things that we're seeing, because we are capable of closing this gap, but it's going to require more creativity and flexibility than we've ever seen before. So I want to start with this. So this is the first half of the squeeze. It's what Ann was talking about. We're not alone in terms of how we're experiencing a challenge to employment, right? Since 2006, ManpowerGroup has been tracking talent shortages around the globe. We ask 40,000 employers every year some very simple questions, one of which is, are you having difficulty finding the talent you need? We have never seen numbers this high. A global average of 45% of employers report difficulty in hiring. That is due to two reasons. One is, in most developed countries, demographics aren't doing us a favor. So we have an aging out problem. In manufacturing, on top of that, we have an opting in problem. So people not selecting to not go into that field and those occupations. And we have a rapid aging out. Very few countries are experiencing the demographic dividend, and when they do, it's a demographic dividend of people that don't necessarily have the right skills for the jobs that are required. On the other hand, we have a rapid evolution in terms of roles and skills. So how many of you have seen the McKinsey report that talks about how roles and skills are evolving? Scattering a couple of hands. Okay, so the bottom line is that report talks about the fact that, yes, there will be some jobs that go away, but it's not as many as people think. They estimated about 5%. What's really interesting is that 45% of the tasks that can be automated will be automated. So if you just do the quick math, that means the work is going to look different, very, very different. And the question that we have facing us then is not just the typical shortage, it's a shortage and a need to upskill like never before. That means that what was important is not necessarily as important. So in an abundant world, a talent abundancy world, what is really, really important is an exact match. And we tuned and trained our applicant tracking systems and our HR teams to look for that exact match with all of these wonderful keyword searches and filtration processes, because we thought what mattered was the discrete skill. But what we lost sight of is what really mattered is something that's always mattered, which is people's ability to adapt and evolve and to learn and grow with you. This becomes even more evident in a scarcity environment because, and a scarcity environment at a time when we've got a lot of evolution, because we don't even know some of the jobs that will be required going forward. That's that 65% of Gen Z, or jobs that Gen Z will perform don't exist yet. We've heard that talked about a lot. So what matters then? It can't be like it is today. Hey, Python's a hot skill. Well, in 2 years, Python going to be a hot skill, Ann? Not really, no. What matters was that you could actually learn the language to begin with, right? So things like creativity, emotional intelligence, and cognitive flexibility are what matter most. And has that ever not been true?
No, being creative, being adaptable in the workplace has always been part of the DNA of every corporation. I think we haven't placed as much importance on it recently because we've gotten so bogged down in the fact that we need absolutely the right skill at the right time, and it's just not there today.
Yeah, so we have to go back to getting good at something that we used to be good at a time where we've really cut down a lot of the learning and development programs in corporations. We haven't maybe looked at workforce development in the most modernized way that we could. We've got a lot of partners in the audience in 4-year and 2-year institutions and workforce investment boards that can be part of that solution. But we all have to understand that it's not just about landing on a specific skill in a short period of time. It's about the journey, and that journey is ever onward and upward. So I want to introduce the research component of this. How many of you are familiar with UI Labs, which is just in the backyard here? Okay, so UI Labs has City Digital under it and DMDII, which is the Digital Manufacturing Design Innovation Institute. This is part of the Manufacturing USA network of institutes, and their remit has been to look at how to make manufacturing globally competitive in the US. So even though they're all geolocated, they all have a national wingspan, if you will. And the Digital Manufacturing and Design Innovation Institute has the broadest wingspan of all of them because all manufacturing subsectors are looking at some degree of digitalization. Some of them are just moving faster than others. You see some of the partners that were involved in this work. The goal was to outline what's the degree of change we're looking at and over what period of time. So as digital comes in and remakes manufacturing processes, what happens to roles and skills? How will they change? And what is it we need to plan for? And together we identified 165 roles that were either new or evolving very, very rapidly. And that's really important for all of us to understand. We're all talking about a skills gap and a crisis and trying to find the talent we need. But we have to remember that when we get people onto the ladder, we're going to have to move them up very, very quickly. And for those who are already occupying a place on the ladder, they can't get comfortable. That's not where you build a cot and take a nap. It's a continual progression. From the perspective of a client, I present this as a view that may be helpful. We talk to a lot of clients around the world. We have 400,000 clients around the world, and a huge chunk of them are in manufacturing. And I've spent the last couple of years sharing this research with our clients. And one thing that I have found is they usually have a digital strategy, right? You see it in their literature, you see it in the annual report. So they've got a direction. And that direction is typically, how are we going to remake our solutions? How are we going to remake our services and our products? And from a process perspective, how are we going to do it in a more efficient way than we've done it before? The piece that is usually not as present is, do we have the workforce to do what we're saying we need to do? And if not, what are we going to need to do to get there over a pretty rapid period of time? So they recognize that there is a pain, but they haven't necessarily quantified it. That's the challenge that companies are running into. Do we have the talent here? Can we upskill that talent? What's the right mix of strategies from, trying to pull in exact match and trying to develop the talent we need? And so it's in this context that the research was put together. So this is a map of all of the technical domains of manufacturing. And what we did is we looked at those 165 roles and said, how are they distributed? In other words, what's the degree of change? If I'm looking at my production and processing, which is the gray box, how much of a degree of change am I going to experience? Is it 2%? Is it 5%? Is it 50%? And we identified it's a pretty high degree of change in most of these boxes, although in production and processing, it's pretty dominant. And some of these aren't a surprise, right? You're already seeing some of these evolution of skills and roles, but depending on where you're at on the journey as an employer, you may be experiencing more pain and tension in certain areas than others. And there's this one called Omni here, which is basically those talents that actually have to span all of those technical domains and understand a vast array of information. And I'm curious, as you go around and you're talking to clients in this area, how they're feeling this. I mean, my experience is if I've got a company that has a quarter of the roles inside of their organization changing, that's a lot. That's very disruptive, potentially.
It's a lot, and from our observation, we are inadequately prepared. Some companies are doing it better than others with great training programs and investing at a very early age. But what we're seeing is a big gap in not having the right skills to fill these new opportunities in digital manufacturing. It's a very tough situation for the U.S. I believe, going forward.
Yeah, most definitely. And I just want to give you guys a view of how pervasive the change is. You're not expected to be able to read this, by the way, but it's just plotting those 165 roles in a diagram so that you can see how wide this is. And we'll give you access to the full report. It's free. You can just download it. For those of you who touch workforce planning and workforce development, this is actually a really helpful piece of information, because what it's doing is it's breaking down those roles by technical demand, and it's also breaking down the time frame in which they're likely to come online for an organization. So based on the technology the organization has adopted, which of these roles will they need when? Which was a very important question to be able to answer, because it also gives you the timeline of how much time do I actually have to develop that talent that's required. Here is a more eye-friendly chart of the kinds of roles. So this is just a representative sample. 2 years ago, I had never heard of a digital twin architect, ever. Any of you in this room that have heard of it know what digital twinning is? Again, a few hands going up. So it's like the most sophisticated version of modeling that you can imagine in simulation, right? So we're creating digital twins of products and lines and processes so we can, for instance, test out what it would be to refit a line and work out the kinks before we actually put something through. So it's an efficiency play, and the technology now exists to do that in a cheap and accessible way. What about digital ethicist? What happens when you're dealing with masses of consumer information, supply chain information? How do you make the right kinds of decisions? And so now quality, risk, ethics, legal all converge. So some of this is formation of new kinds of roles based on new types of work. And a lot of them are and roles, if you will. These are very high-end positions. So 2 years ago, no digital twin architect except in GE's annual report. Now these are posted positions that you can see, and they're growing in terms of their mass. What happens on the shop floor, right? Because this is where everyone feels that delicacy. We talk about where jobs may go away or how jobs may be reformulated. Remember that that represents a significant chunk of the workforce, that 28% of the 165 roles. We think about this as transition opportunity. So those roles don't all go away at once, and some of them don't go away at all, but new technologies come online, which means they may not touch as much equipment as they used to touch. They may touch no equipment, right? But surely they need to have a knowledge of manufacturing processes. They need to have knowledge of the equipment and the tooling, but the way they interact may be in a purely digital way, right? That swipe of the phone, right or left, right? The Tinderification of the manufacturing workforce, as horrifying as that may sound. So we pulled out 60 roles that we think are really ripe to be upskilled over the next 1 to 2 years so that they're ready to enter workforce in mass and enable these great manufacturing processes. And I think it'd be great to hear some of your perspective on how you're seeing some of these transformations work out right now in terms of what you're seeing companies do, how you're seeing individuals adjust.
Yes, I will use an example of a northern Wisconsin company who we were just strapped for finding, people at even entry-level positions. And their philosophy was go out and find more. Let's find more people. Let's partner with every agency we can find to draw in more people. Well, there were not more people. So one of the things that we did with them was to create a training center where we trained on product development as well as soft skills for them to be able to grow in their profession. This area has a very large Hmong population, and we brought in instructors to teach English to the Hmong population, train them in a progression for the pharmaceutical industry, and we were able to supply the workforce. It was not something that happened overnight. It's been a 2-year span of putting this together. But I think it's important that, it's not going out to find the people you want. It's working with the people you have and getting them upskilled. I think Manpower does a very good job of that with our associates. We have a whole group of university classes, as well as something called My Path. And what we're trying to do is provide a college education free of charge to anyone who is a Manpower employee. And that is to raise the associate experience. And it's selfish on our part because we want to retain this workforce. So that's what I see, Rebecca, as the 2-year progression.
And I think the mindset shift you're referring to is the most critical one. And it really starts with leaders understanding we are moving from abundance to scarcity. Because if you don't understand that shift, you'll do exactly what you're talking about, which is we'll go out, we'll find more, we'll go out, we'll find more. No, you've got to work with what you have and be responsible to the talent that you have inside of your doors to be upskilling them and looking at your community and getting creative. I will tell you, we're in a space right now where we have got to be just as creative and adaptable as the individual. So asking questions like, why not? Why wouldn't you work with a limited eligibility pool? Why wouldn't you think about the kind of program that Ann taught? Usually people's response is it's a cost, but it's really an investment, which is what that employer is finding, is that return on investment has been tremendous because they have people who are loyal, people who have put in the effort to build up their skills, and they're being offered the next step on the ladder continually. But it is a big mindset shift, and it starts with understanding the numbers and the degree and the pace of the change. There just aren't any corners you can go to extract perfectly matching talent anymore. And if digital means anything, because it is the biggest business model change we have seen in decades, but in a couple of years, it'll just be how we do business, right? There'll be that will be our new platform. It means that all of us have to be able to adapt and evolve and change in a pretty rapid way. So we talk about 4 strategies to win with in this double squeeze world. The build, you've heard us talk about. The buy, it's not that buy isn't part of the strategy anymore. It's not that you don't still do recruitment campaigns and try to acquire talent. It means just like your investment portfolio needs to shift for the market conditions, your investment portfolio in these 4 strategies needs to invest. What would you say before, let's say in the last couple of years, before employers were really feeling the pinch, was the percentage they would put on buy versus build?
70% on buy. Let's go out and buy. Let's go out and find another agency, find somebody else who can bring in this talent. So it was all on buy. It is not easy to change the mindset of the American business world right now. They're still a little bit in that buy mode. It's a constant education process about building your workforce and bridging the gap between what you have and what you don't have. And really training and retraining. We've gotten to a point as well where we've made it so difficult to go to work. We have so many requirements, background checks and drug screens, and you can't have a felony, and it's so difficult. We have to start taking some of these requirements down because there is a good solid workforce out there that can be built instead of bought.
And a lot of times what our experience has been is when we really push on those eligibility requirements that some companies have, some of them have them for very, very, very good reasons, right? But in some cases, they're a legacy carryover of an abundance mindset, right? So everyone has to have a high school degree or GED because in the land of abundance, I had to have some way of sorting through 3,000 resumes. is that really still what's required, or are there other ways to get to, does this person have the right skills and aptitude to be successful in my organization? And will my organization be more successful for having that person? So it's really challenging some of that on the buy side. And buying is expensive.
Very expensive.
And you have to really think about the fact that even when you buy, you're still going to have to build, particularly with our millennials, but really every generation. The number one way to drive retention is to continue to invest in their careers. That's what our research shows over and over and over again. So there's no get out of jail free card on build. Borrow, just thinking more creatively about the kinds of talent platforms there are out there to accomplish the work. There is a piece that we can make available to you called Gig Responsibly, and it's about next gen work and how to tap into some of those platforms for some of those niche requirements that you have. And then this last one is bridging. And bridging is really important because there are some jobs that are going to fade away. What happened to the people that were working the counter in the video store that gave you recommendations on their favorite movies? It's all, sitting in an app, or it's sitting in your Netflix preferences, right? So where were their adjacent skills? What could they be trained to do that they hadn't really thought of doing before? And we've seen some amazing leaps. And one example that we have in this deck, which we'll also make available to you, is something we did in Italy, which is just a fun example because it's in motorsports, right? Fast cars. They were seeing a real restructuring of workforce around the textile industry, which meant the falling away of traditional textile workers. And we saw an opportunity to retrain those textile workers as carbon fiber cutters for the motorsports industry. So we took those people and through our academy, we retrained them into very well-paying carbon fiber cutters. But that was a bridge strategy. They hadn't gone to school for that. They were working in a garment factory. So this is the kind of creativity you may need. We're seeing people say, hey, I've got this really smart person on the floor. Perhaps they belong in finance. I mean, I can't remember a time when that was a conversation, but it does require that kind of why not mentality to retain and build a terrific workforce. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the other strategies, Anne, that you're seeing?
Yes, we're seeing, a lot of, I think, creativity from employers today. Definitely, providing more training, providing opportunities if they can to work from home. We're finding incentives that are being offered for further education. It's just a multitude of things, and I think that when companies are putting together their talent acquisition strategy, all of these things are extremely important as part of that strategy going forward.
Yeah, most definitely. And I would like to point out wage is still on here. So when you do a look at the kind of talent that's going to be in most demand, one of the things that we end up finding is a lot of times employers, just like they haven't retooled their talent acquisition strategies, haven't really reset the market expectations around wage, just like they haven't reset the expectations around what people will expect from a career trajectory. So this is a checklist of things to really think through. And it's the basic hygiene of attracting, retaining, and growing your workforce. Notice that number, 36% of employers are adjusting education and experience, right? So really questioning, what is eligibility really? Do we have anything arbitrary that's standing in the way of getting the talent we need in the door? Couple of examples we wanted to leave you with. The motorsports one is here. Land Rover, we partnered to set up an apprenticeship program. So we've got 18,000 people we've placed into work, 8,000 apprenticeships over 5 years. So again, it was something that we needed to look at. Well, what are those skills that are required going forward really? How are they different? And can we collectively invest in the upskilling of that talent and make them career ready and ready to continue to attain ongoing skills? We have a partnership in the UK we call CTP. These last two are really addressing parts of the workforce that have not really been tapped fully. So the untapped parts of the workforce, in this case, the veteran community. Again, how do you make it easier for people to transition out and move in? I'll tell you, with the Academy of Advanced Manufacturing, our partnership with Rockwell, it is incredible to see people that have commanded a unit, been to 30 countries, and they're working as a picker packer for $13 an hour. How is that acceptable? They have been trained on state-of-the-art technology to deal with complex processes without clear answers, and they're doing that? So how do we make it easier? How do we help them bridge into really good opportunities? And a lot of that is doing the hard work to figure out how what they did in the military prepares them for these careers in advanced and digital manufacturing. Because I promise you, there is excellent correlation. That has been our experience. And we need more of these. There's a lot of room under the tent, right? This is not something that ManpowerGroup can fix on its own, or one economic development region can fix on its own. It takes a lot of hands at the oars to change this narrative to where we've brought in everybody that we can and gotten them ready to fuel our, incredible surge in manufacturing. You heard what Foxconn shared today. The jobs that they're talking about, they may have these kind of plain sounding names like operator. Underneath them is this. So when you think about what manufacturing looks like for the future and what's really required, it's a tip of the iceberg. We don't have a body problem, we have a skills problem, and the last I checked, that's fundamentally solvable. So that's all we have. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes for questions that we'd be happy to answer. Yeah.
I just would say, I come from a site selection background, so I help companies find locations. And you're seeing site selectors now look at because of the tight labor market, how do I look at a position and translate it into skills? Instead of looking at the job specifically, what are the skills that I can now quantify in a region? And I don't know if you use the program ONET, if anybody is familiar with ONET. It's a way to take a job and dissect it based on skill sets. And so you're starting to see that become more of a quantifiable way of looking at a location is the skills versus the jobs.
Yeah, so the only, and I'll start and then I'll let you comment. ONET is great, right? Our jobs are all laid against the ONET taxonomy. So the thing that I would just tell people to be thinking about is ONET is telling what you have, right? And what we need to get really good at from a workforce and economic development perspective is then projecting, so here's what we're able to do with that workforce over the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years. That's where the excitement happens, because that's giving you a baseline and you can say, we're really strong here, and we know that with this certification program, this badging program, we can convert those workers into what you need. I think that's when the magic happens. And
Right. I don't have very much more to add to that other than I think, again, part of that strategy of where do you put your company, what location, the key to that is what is the workforce that's available, what is the workforce that can be trained or upskilled. If you look at our I-55, 57 corridor, we've got distribution center after distribution center after distribution center. Do we have talent? Absolutely not. It's a fight and a war to find people. So every time we locate a company, that critical factor is how do we develop that talent?
They're not locating now where they can't find the talent, so they don't locate.
Right.
And so if that continues to be the bigger nut to crack, they're going to be going further and further where they can find the talent, regardless of whether the other cost variables are high or not.
That's right.
The talent variable is the critical location.
The example I used in northern Wisconsin, Companies coming in, building, and there are these large pharmaceutical plants, no talent. So now they're constricted, they can't grow, and they either have to think of, I have to move this company somewhere else and shut down, or I've got to figure out a different way to get the work done. So it starts at the very beginning.
Hi, thank you. Coming from a local economic development perspective, there's plenty of communities here, I'm sure, that would be interested in knowing this. When a business is in town or coming to town, we often tout the fact that we've got a very strong community college system, and we actually have a campus in our community. Has there been a willingness or a reluctance for the most part, from some of these companies to actually use the community college to help them with some of these issues that you've talked about today? I never quite know whether or not it's the community college that's, being successful at reaching out to local businesses and finding out what their needs are and putting together a program that helps to train their workers. Or is there any sort of sentiment that you have learned over time that can help us economic developers best communicate and bridge those gaps? Basically, are the community colleges delivering what the businesses want?
So I can start and then hand over. So it's interesting. I come from Wisconsin. We have what I believe is a world-class university and technical college system. When I press that particular issue with employers, I get a span of answers. So, and they're time bound. So a few years ago, you would see that a lot of technical colleges had put their eggs in the basket of, we will actually become the low-cost alternative to the first 2 years of university. So the impact that had on employers is they felt like, well, you just shifted your focus from me to that particular economic model, to which my response was, but how much were you really aligned with them from a regional growth perspective to begin with? So there always has to be two people on both sides of the table for the conversation to really flow. And so what I've seen in the last couple of years is an adjustment to really thinking about how do we actually get all of the right people under the roof and get all of the wood behind the arrow. And I know that's a generality, but it's what Mark Monet was talking about before, which is getting all of those educators together in the room with all of the employers and with economic development and actually saying, this is how much we need to move the needle by and by when, and getting everyone aligned. Then you have a very powerful story to tell when you're trying to attract organizations, because they know that they really do have a one-stop shop. And everybody is headed in the same direction because everyone's clear on the vision. The vision isn't guess at what your economic model will be in the future or guess at which employers want to partner with you. It's, we have these numbers, we have to hit them in this period of time, and this is how we need to move together. So they took the guesswork out of it. And I think that's a really good pattern book to look at.
Yeah, I also think in some cases in the work that I've done in Chicago with city colleges and with some of the junior colleges, is that they cannot change the curriculum fast enough to adapt to what's coming next and what employers need. And it really is a setback because they're training on things that are no longer relevant. I think we started off with a very good process with city colleges in Chicago, and somehow we got a little lost. And I think we need to go back and revisit it, look at the jobs of the future and what's coming next, so that they can be out in front of that curriculum instead of behind it.
We're getting the 1 minute sign. Does anyone want to sneak in a quick 30-seconder? Yeah. In the back.
Have you worked with businesses and employers to discuss the concept of place and investment in community for retaining talent? It's great if you can get a person to a community, but if they don't like the community, they may be looking elsewhere within a few years.
You want to take that one, or you want me to take it?
You can take it.
1, 2, 3, no, just kidding. Okay, so Yes, I've seen some really good best practices around this. In Milwaukee, in the M7 region, there has been a group of people working on something called the Tech Hub that, there are many different desired outcomes for Tech Hub, but one of the key ones is creating a community in which when we attract people, they don't want to leave. Right, so really thinking about the kinds of workers we're trying to draw in, what are their demographics, what are the kinds of things that appeal to them, and that cut across transportation, arts, culture, entertainment, ongoing education, and really they did a great job of getting the employers and educators in the same huddle and civic leaders and trying to think about intentionally how do we design a community that people will not only be attracted to a job, but they'll be attracted to the community, which also means it's not going to be for everyone. If you haven't seen a snowflake, you may not be a good fit for the Midwest, or if you really hate the cold, weather is a reality and a barrier. But if you set that aside, do you have the kind of engagement and activities that the people that you're looking at will want to be involved in? And that has to become part of the economic development roadmap too, because economic development is workforce development, which requires attraction and then retention. So, and we just got the red sign.
All right.
Thank you all so much for
you.
your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everything. Thank you for being here. It's really did a great job. We are going to take a 5-minute break. So if anybody needs to use the restroom, facilities management is going to take the plates away, and we will start the 1 o'clock session at about 1:05. So please be back in your seats in about 5 minutes or so. Thank you.